Very good. And so I will share my camera so that you can see me. And not that you shouldn't. Not that I want to take away from the presentation, because the content of the presentation is what I want everybody to be focusing on. Again, so happy morning here. Again, I want to go back to the vision statement here that we have up in front of us here, in that there's an important distinction here, in that recognizing Pacific County as having unique severe weather constraints. Reminder that, again, for folks that may not be familiar with where we sit here, is that because of our coastal proximity, winter storms with winds of 80 to 90 to 100 miles an hour are fairly typical, and that the PUD recognizes this, and to that extent, pushes a lot of utilities underground, has a very strong annual tree trimming exercise, so that power is maintained relatively constantly throughout the seasonal storms that we definitely expect. We also sit right on the right on an earthquake zone here, so the real risk of a large earthquake and a resulting tsunami is something we prepare for regularly, and we expect that in the event of a major earthquake, this county, because of its far being far from the I-5 corridor, will be cut off for some weeks before attention can really be made for all of us here. So in that sense, broadband as a necessity for livelihood, right, is pretty important to all of us here. Now, as we think about what's at stake, and we think about the activities that we know are important for us here, broadbandusa.gov identifies today that broadband speeds for hospitals should be in excess of 1 gigabit per second. They recognize that library access should be in excess of 100 megabits per second, that schools should be equal to that in terms of capacity and speed, that small businesses should have at least 50 megabit per second speed and access, and that at our homes, 25 megabit per second access is the norm, is the expected. And again, these are speed and capacity constraints coming from the United States government relative to their recommendations as to what should be expected in all locales. Here in Washington State, of course, the Commerce Department's Broadband Office under the Public Works Board has set its own goals for 2024, 2026, and 2028. By 2024, all businesses and residences to have access of 25 megabit per second download and 3 megabit per second upload. By 2026, to have symmetric 1 gigabit per second up and down service for institutions, public benefit institutions. And that by 2028, you'd have symmetric access to 150 megabit per second, to access for businesses and residences. So note that Washington State broadband goals are actually less than some of the United States goals that we just saw in the prior slide. We salute, however, the state government for recognizing the importance of broadband and for setting strong goals. But we have to acknowledge that these goals seem light relative to the kind of needs and the kind of standards that we would expect to see even today. Now, relative to where we stand here in Pacific County, the State Commerce Department has a state broadband survey that is available, and I want to take this opportunity to urge everyone to take part in this. We have about 111 responses from Pacific County this morning. I took this screenshot about an hour or so ago. Of these 111 responses, 52 of the responses who have broadband have speeds less than 10 megabit per second. And these are indicated on the map here by the red dots. So if you're looking at the indicators that in terms of who's got good speed and bad speed, green obviously indicates a strong positive speed, well above 10. Red indicates the under 10 megabit per second speeds. You're seeing that it's we are scattered, speeds, even for folks along major highways, have inconsistent access to speeds or even availability. So this really brings to light here the issues that folks are dealing with in real time in terms of speed and access. Now, the EDC did its own survey of public benefit institutions throughout the county. We conducted this survey pre-pandemic. So this survey was conducted in December and January of this year. We reached out to all of our schools, our hospitals, libraries, municipal and county governments. We reached out to federal government institutions that are located throughout the county, and all of our banks and our ports. What we found is that the responses indicated, in terms of who was connecting us across institutions, that Charter Cable, Spectrum Cable access has 20% of these institutions connected. K-20, the public school system access, has a 16%. And then it varies all the way throughout the rest of the providers in terms of who has broadband access and who's providing that broadband access. We ask about concerns to institutions on this broadband, and you see that speed tops out. 23% of all respondents, indicated that speed is a major concern of them today. Cost and reliability came in at second and third. Resiliency as a fourth, capacity and availability as the final topping out on this final top 5 list. Now, I want to make note about the speed, reliability, and cost concerns, because these are concerns of today. I want to contrast those with a question we ask about what concerns you experience in the future, for the next 5 years coming up, because we've got some different perspectives on that. Now, these are the concerns of today, and you can appreciate that cost comes up as a high concern, in that the survey indicates that we've got 40% of our institutions are paying under $250 a month for their broadband service. That means that you've got 60% of the institutions are paying more than $250. And some of these, as you can see, paying substantially more than this. So we've got work to do in terms of improving cost access to the institutions. Mind you, when we started thinking about these surveys and these survey results, we were all doing these surveys pre-COVID. So it might be interesting to see what sort of concerns and cost issues and priorities these institutions are thinking about now relative to 5 or 6 months here of COVID shutdown. This is an important slide from my perspective, because it shows where these institutions are looking forward to relative concerns that they have in a 5-year future scenario. They're seeing that speed, of course, will still remain a priority concern, but look how capacity has risen to number 2 and cost has slid down to number 4. So the concept of cost, it's certainly a priority, but it's not the overriding issue that is of concern for the future, in that capacity is. It's one point of example, by the way, is we've heard from a hospitality industry that they expect and need for every hotel room, every lodging unit in the county to be able to support up to 5 remote devices that need to connect to the internet at any one time. Given that 1/3 of our GDP here in Pacific County is tourism, hospitality related, the need for capacity inside of our lodging and restaurants and so forth becomes a priority concern. And you can appreciate why this, as one example, pushes capacity up to the tops. We definitely have seen, by the way, with respect to our school situations, given COVID, the need for capacity inside the home. An informal survey that we conducted to each of the 7 school districts that serve Pacific County indicated that only 75% of the students being served today have access to broadband, and of those, only 50% of our students had adequate capacity inside the household to support simultaneous users. In fact, the superintendent of our largest school district in Long Beach indicated that she herself has to ration her household users, 4 of which need simultaneous access to the internet. She has to ration access to only 2 at a time, so as to allow sufficient bandwidth to reach to serve the educational vehicles that have been provided to them. Now, here's the great conundrum here, is that across all the responses to our institution survey, and again, this was pre-COVID back in January, each of the bars represent an individual response from an institution relative to download and upload speed. The red line indicates the cost that they're paying, that each of these providers is paying for such access. And the point being shown here is that you've got a very inconsistent line of cost relative to speed. You would expect, certainly hope, that your cost might be in alignment with the kind of speeds you're enjoying, the kind of bandwidth you're receiving. That is certainly not the case based upon institutions in this January survey. So here again comes this conundrum of access, speed, connections here in Pacific County, and the widespread disparity and inequality of access. Now, as we look forward as a working group, these requirements here stand forth for us. For all of our institutions, businesses, and residences, the must-have requirements for us include the obvious checks of coverage, speed, reliability. We've added resiliency and redundancy and fairly priced internet to these must-have requirements to recognize, one, the fact that we sit as a Pacific County as a county that must be concerned about severe weather events and geologic upheavals that might threaten our well-being for significant amounts of time, given our exposure to the Pacific Ocean and its weather conditions. We also recognize that we expect fairly priced internet. We are indeed far from the I-5 corridor, so our 22,000 people in our county are scattered over 1,000 square miles. So we recognize that we are a sparsely populated topography that is dominated by forest land. That should not, however, prevent us from having fairly priced and certainly equitably priced internet. So in terms of projects underway, in terms of what we're doing about it here, Guy mentioned a CURB grant, the Community Economic Revitalization Board, that granted us in 2019 $50,000 to help us understand in detail what kind of coverage and speed assessment we have throughout the county, so as to be able to give us a solid mapping of the assessments of where we have gaps and where we should be prioritizing our build-out budgets. Public Works Board has also granted us $50,000 to help us confirm the service level requirements at a more detailed level, and to help us pursue new forms of collaboration, business structure, more competitive considerations for how we might want to build out and service the gaps that have been identified from the CURB funding. And to all of this then, local match, the Port of Ilwaco and the Pacific County EDC is also contributed matching funds to help provide for administration support and program support for these 2 grants. We are indeed very appreciative of CURB and the Public Works Board for their support, for their recognition that here in Pacific County, we have a significant need and a significant attempt to collaborate across, again, our municipalities, our ports, our tribe, and our community to help forge a better plan going forward. We are aided in our work here by Petrichor Broadband. Cara Rybold and Joe Poiret are with us here today to speak to the contributions that they have in terms of helping us pursue the mapping and the detailed assessment of broadband. Joe and his team will speak here in a few moments here. But we're incredibly graced by their contributions of expertise and competence in helping to map out objectively where our broadband sits relative to the rest of the state. One of the key priorities that they've been able to assess to us and to articulate to us is that it's very clear that here in Pacific County we have very limited competition and customer choice. In fact, most all providers, most all the folks we talk to indicate that they may have one, maybe only one, and at most only two choices for broadband internet. Where they stand. So this is stands in far contrast to more urban areas that enjoy a selection of 4 to 5 different competitors routinely. So this monopolistic market forces here in Pacific County does push us towards higher cost and an acceptance of lower quality standards for performance. Broadband infrastructure is also noted by Petrocor as being very slow to deploy. We'll look in a couple slides here in terms of the map of where broadband is today. Infrastructure build out has proceeded very slowly based upon availability of supportive funding from federal grants and as competitive opportunities can align. Our system architecture, is the key point, is non-redundant and is quite brittle. We are one excavator away from someone hitting a fiber line and inadvertently knocking out broadband for large swaths of the county. So the lack of backup for our internet here in the county is significant. Note that we only have one federal highway that comes in and out of Pacific County, and there's only 3 state highways that also come in and out of our county. This again speaks to our geography, and it speaks to being so far remote from the I-5 corridor that indeed the traditional access routes across highways for broadband is fairly limited. So net, what does all this mean? We do pay comparatively high cost for our broadband relative to our urban counterparts. We do not have broadband access and capacity that is anywhere near the options that are offered to broadband to broadband folks, to broadband customers in more urban environments. And what this clearly means for ISPs, for entrepreneurs, for new businesses here, is that broadband, the broadband consideration, is there enough capacity, becomes a determining factor of locating in Pacific County or expanding their business here in Pacific County. And we are indeed seeing folks ask that question of realtors when they consider moving to Pacific County or consider moving to a particular location within Pacific County. What kind of broadband can we get? This again speaks to the fact that broadband is indeed a priority, a need for a need that for general expectation of well-being. Now, I mentioned the mapping. This again is mapping that Petrocor has done for us across the county. The map is a visualization of what Pacific County looks like from a broadband perspective. All of the blue is aerial-based broadband. All of the red is fiber that has been built underground. I noted earlier that our PUD has a policy of installing utilities underground because of the severe weather we have to deal with here in Pacific County. And so we recognize the support of that. Note that underground installation does make for a challenge in easily tapping into that underground as opposed to above ground aerial based fiber. The green blocks that you see on the map here indicate where fiber is installed either underground or above ground. The amber colored blocks indicate where it's proposed, where we'd like to see a near-term expansion of that. Zooming in on some of this map just to look at it, you can see here again where fiber is installed today in the blue and the red, underground and above ground. The meters that the PUD has are colored in green. The poles, every pole that the PUD supports is also highlighted as a circle. And so again, this is meant to give a quick indication of where fiber exists today and how easily it can be expanded via above ground poles or via roadway access and easements underground. Looking at this in a little closer focus, you start seeing particular, detailed maps of individual residences where PUD meters indicate electricity has been pulled, where poles are nearby, and where fiber might be installed and available already today. So you start getting a very discrete understanding of how access can be pulled from existing fiber across poles to individual residences or businesses, as indicated by it, as suggested by the PUD meters, by electric meters might be there. Now, looking at this in aggregate, one of the assessments we've done is a density, just to give a sense for just where, where it might make sense from a competitive standpoint to offer expanded broadband based upon the number of meters, the number of electric meters that are being supported in a particular geography. And obviously, the darker colors indicate more density of population, more density of meters. Therefore, this might suggest that here might be a more competitive opportunity for expansion of broadband, expansion of quality broadband. The lighter colored blocks, as you see on this map here, certainly become indicating of where residences and businesses exist, but where the sparsity of population and the dispersal of population might make that extension of fiber that much more difficult. So this is helpful from an understanding understanding density and reach constraints. What becomes even more concerning, however, is in looking at the topography that we have to deal with in reaching all of these locations. This map, as I indicated earlier, 70% of our county, 70% of our 1,000 square miles is in forested timberland. And this maps with a hilly terrain. The Willapa Hills have, go up to 2,500 feet in height. We have valleys that are formed from the rivers and the streams that flow into Willapa Bay, which defines the counties, the watershed. So this forested timberland has few roads of any note. And the hills and the topography make just the idea of laying fiber and connecting everyone in as you might think, rather challenging. This close-up really starts indicating, from a satellite perspective, really starts indicating the challenge of dealing with these valleys and rather limited poles. Remember, the circles indicate pole locations, and so you have here relatively few electric poles that could be used for aerial connections, and you have sparsely populated electric meters, which would indicate a business or a residence. Note also that much of the blank spaces you're looking at here on the satellite map is harvested timber area. And the harvested timber area, of course, grows back into densely forested timber area over the course of a few years. So we recognize the value of the timber industry to who we are, Pacific County, but the challenge that this means in terms of reaching out and providing broadband. And by the way, again, we're not talking here about just a few remote country homes that are sitting in these remote areas. We have school districts that are located in these areas. We have businesses that employ a significant number of individuals located in these areas. So that's again, it's not an option for us to consider excluding certain populations from decent access to broadband. We view it as an obligation to reach folks who are living near where their livelihoods have been created and where their homes and their businesses are situated. Now, to this point, the work in process that we're dealing with here today, suggests that that there's the activities that we're trying to deal with here are proposing a construction participation in construction in the Public Works Board 2020 funding cycle for funding to expand infrastructure to very remote and unserved areas, such as these areas I've just indicated earlier. This is a grant cycle that is of limited funding relative to the Public Works Board. They recognize that $18 million is being made available statewide for all these projects. We are concerned that that this will supply only a limited number of a limited amount of funding for activities that we probably will see throughout the need here. However, we recognize that we'll be able to deal with we'll have to deal with the limited funding that we've got. However, the activity that we're performing here in Pacific County on this grant is intended to at least give us a solid engineering and construction plan for where and how we tackle this build-out problem. Note that because of the topography we just mentioned on the last slide, that we'll probably have to employ unique technologies in terms of reaching some of these remote areas, and that would include some fixed wireless installations, perhaps some other novel access techniques to reach remote locales. Also underway is activity from the Shoalwater Bay Tribe, a federally recognized tribe that we have here in Pacific County that is pursuing a unique waiver that the Federal Communications Commission is offering to tribes to take access to a 2.5 gigahertz spectrum. And I apologize, that should say 2.5 gigahertz spectrum, not 2.5 megahertz spectrum. But 2.5 gig is a spectrum that the FCC is making available to tribes, not just for their local reservation areas, but if approved, to a broader area to reach their tribal members who might be dispersed, who might be off reservation. This is a waiver then is being pursued by the Shoalwater Tribe to achieve this gigahertz spectrum, and that this is an application that will be they'll be submitting here rather shortly. To all of these, by the way, as a quick shout out here, is that your letters of support for both what we're doing in pursuing public works funding, as well as what the tribe is pursuing in terms of a build out. These are indeed welcomed, and indeed we look forward to you making contact to us, either an email as a follow-up or a phone follow-up. We can help you with a template for how these letters of support could be prepared. As you can appreciate, the funders, both the from the Public Works Board, from the construction grant, and the FCC from the waiver application, letters of support from the community mean a lot. In terms of timeline, Petrichor Broadband is finalizing their data collection and mapping activities and modeling out the estimated cost of building out access to Pacific County. They expect to complete this in the rather short order in the next month or so. As I indicated, the Shoalwater Tribe will be applying for their gigahertz spectrum. That application will actually be due on September 2nd. The Port of Ilwaco is applying for the Public Works Board construction grant. That application is due no later than September 9th. So if programs are awarded and approved, activities will begin this fall, late this fall, in terms of how we complete financing and implementation plans and construction build out that will lead into 2021. Again, we're eager to pursue near-term build out and near-term construction activities as we go forward here. And so we're trying to get well ahead of the 2024 and 2026 goals that the state outlines, knowing that especially now in this world of COVID in which we're living with, adequate, safe, competent, secure broadband is an absolute priority for our community. And this includes our institutions, our businesses, residences, as we go forward. So with that, we definitely want to invite questions and comments and follow up The email address to Sue at edc@pacificedc.org, edc@pacificedc.org, is a great way, is an easy way to make sure that that your voice is being heard, your questions are being heard. Would love to take questions and comments you have now that may have come up, during the during our talk here. Any additional questions or information we can provide at this point. Again, reiterating that our objective here this morning is to update you upon what the working group in Pacific County has been doing over this over the past. I want to emphasize again to folks that are joining us from outside the county that it's a unique collaboration, and we should all be very proud and excited that the county, its institutions, its governments, its tribe, its school districts, right, its hospitals, its PUD, are all together in working towards a combined solution. And the collaboration that we're seeing across the county for this is impressive, and it respects the urgent imperative for adequate broadband throughout the county. Questions or comments from anyone that we can address here at this point? We urge you to use your chat function to pose any questions. We also, of course, urge you for follow-up to the EDC or to the ports or to myself for additional questions and follow-up.
Kelly, I have a comment from Jamie Judkins, who is the chair of the EDC, Pacific County EDC Board of Directors, and also works with the Shoalwater Bay Tribe. She says, thank you for all the work you're doing for our county, Kelly. And I also have what looks like a hand raised for Michelle Lehman. So I'm going to unmute her for a minute because maybe she can't use the chat box. Oh, she says no, sorry. Okay, does anybody else have questions? Apparently you're incredibly informative.
Or we're not quite hitting all the marks here. I do want to emphasize, and I want to go back to a couple slides here that I just find interesting, because I want to impress upon everyone the topography we're dealing with here. And again, those of us here in Pacific County recognize the topography that we are dealing with. I'm looking forward to the engineering work that's being done in supporting the grants underway. That really mean we're going to have some unique technologies to reach to reach residences and locations that sit throughout the county here. And I'm particularly excited about some of the engineering the work that might mean that how do we use our topography as an advantage to some of this technology. And what I mean by that is that because we have so many hills, that actually creates an opportunity to put towers, to run fiber up to a particular high point in a locality, and then use a technology called fixed wireless that would put an antenna and transmitter on top of that tower that would be sent to that would be connect to a receiver that would be placed upon the rooftop or a similar tower that would be located at a particular residence or institution or business. So the idea of fixed wireless technology is you actually using cellular spectrum to transmit broadband from a high point, a transmitter tower, to a particular location. So this way you're not required to put wires underground. You're not you don't have to lay cable. You're actually using the height advantage and the opportunity of focusing to a particular location.
I have a couple of questions when you're ready.
Please go ahead.
Jim says, what might phased success look like?
So Jim, speaking from the port of Willapa Harbor, phase success might look towards, and in our mind, is that in the next year, in 2021, phase success would look towards a sufficient funding to aid, to actually set in motion construction for some of these fixed wireless installations I've just been speaking to that would reach the majority of our county. And that certainly that could be followed up with then in a 2022 to 2024 timeframe, 2022 to 2024 timeframe for actual extension of even faster technologies, perhaps based upon a higher spectrum, a true 5G or maybe even 6G spectrum, or perhaps even leveraging some of the new satellite technologies that are coming into play. So this is one of the exciting things about the projects we're doing here is that the technology to support innovative access is actually working on our behalf. So that as we think about different spectrum access, we talked today about 5G, but I mean, this is 6G is actually in experimentation in certain locales. And of course, with the advent of the satellite technologies, perhaps we'll actually have decent access there. Again, these are technologies we'll be walking to, but there's near-term progress we can make even in the near term in the 2021 timeframe.
The next question is from Michelle Lehman, and she asks, is the fiber already in?
So, Michelle, your question, it speaks back to this mapping that we have in here, and this is an example of a map, and it's just a little easier to see on it, on these charts here. In that the fiber you're seeing in the map here, the red fiber, the red color is a fiber line that has already been installed by our PUD underground. The blue indicates fiber that is also available across aerial connections, i.e. it's connected under poles. So there is indeed an accurate map countywide now that Petrichor has prepared for us that shows where these lines are located.
And could you add to that doesn't mean that everybody in the immediate vicinity of where that fiber is has access to it?
There's the conundrum, isn't it? So in that just because you have fiber going right by your home, as I happen to have, unless there's a distribution point, unless there is a vault that allows for connection to the fiber, you may not have access to it. And so indeed, this is the situation in which I find myself in, is that I'm 500 feet away from where a fiber line is running. I'm 300 feet away from where a spectrum cable line is running. And yet, because of topography, I, at my business residence, cannot have access to either. So this is the challenge of that last mile connection that people speak to. And this is indeed part of the challenges that we're going to be working with in our build out proposal. How do we bust through the last mile barrier?
Thank you for that. We just, so Michelle Lehman adds then, so like you said, we just need to add the wireless towers.
I don't want to make it sound so simple as that, but yes, that is indeed a technology for fixed wireless that actually has been proven to be quite successful into providing reliable and much higher speed broadband to remote areas, especially forested areas and hilly areas such as we experience here in Pacific County. So the other access point, of course, is that can we make more broadband available through the poles, i.e. above ground, so that we can have easier access to that fiber there. The other point throughout all of this I want to emphasize, however, is that mere technology access of broadband doesn't solve the competition problem. The lack of competitive providers, the lack of number of competitive providers here in Pacific County means that, as Petrichor pointed out earlier, is that we actually have market forces that can basically charge what they want and deliver service levels that are at their own choosing. So the opportunity you start the opportunity for a competitive quality service still remains, and so one of the opportunities one of the things we're looking for as part of the grant funded activities underway is how we might create a more an infrastructure that is more conducive to more competition and at higher quality service. And that may mean some different business structures, perhaps some nonprofit or some social benefit institutions that might be able to provide or offer if you will, a public option for broadband. And again, I'm speaking theoretically at this point because we have no solid plans in place today. But we definitely would be pursuing unique business structures and unique social benefit business organizations that might be able to provide more competitive broadband at higher service levels and at lower cost.
That's all the questions I have so far.
We definitely want to thank everyone for their participation here today, and very much look forward to engaging with you in further updates. Definitely invite you to reach out to Sue at the EDC at pacificedc.org. She'll make sure that any questions are funneled appropriately. I definitely want to salute the providers that are participating closely with us as we engage in this work here. The Pacific County PUD is contributing extraordinary work in terms of helping us to engineer new connections and new opportunities. Steve Appelo of Wahkiakum West has been very collaborative. Robert Pensworth of Crestcom Wireless has been very supportive of our efforts. I want to give a shout out to Ziply Fiber for their work in terms of taking over some fiber connections in some of the most remote part of the county. So again, let's recognize the extraordinary collaboration that is underway to ensure that Pacific County is not left out of what is truly recognized as a necessity for 21st century well-being, and that being adequate, resilient, truly fast broadband.
I do have another question now. I would also like to totally agree with what you just said. The collaboration is amazing. Okay, so I have a question from Diana Thompson in Ocean Park of Harmony Soapworks. Can the tribe provide to non-tribal members?
The FCC waiver that is being pursued. So I mentioned that the tribe is applying to the Federal Communications Commission for a special waiver to be able to service areas outside of the tribal reservations with their 2.5 gigahertz spectrum. Now, this indeed is intended, this license to offer the service would not be, the tribe intends that this would not be limited to only tribal members, that this license to use this access could be taken up by providers to service the general public. So that is indeed the desire, of the tribe, and the opportunity being pursued. Now, there's no assurance that the FCC will grant such waiver. So we want to note that this application is due on September 2nd. We'll have a further update later in the month of September, perhaps in October, relative to what these determinations proceed. But this indicates some of the unique opportunities being pursued to open up new technology opportunities for access.
I have another question from Jules Orr of the Salt Hotel. I have a question about discussions with Charter Spectrum specifically. If you would like, I can unmute him, or you can just address it if you're familiar with what he's talking about.
I'm not. Jules, why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question?
I don't know if he can.
Okay. And And Jules, if indeed there's something in the chat you want to reach out to, I definitely want to note that the Spectrum folks have been very collaborative in our outreach with them. And the Vinny Bellecci is the construction coordinator for Pacific County, and lives here in the Peninsula. And so if you need his contact coordinates, I can definitely provide those to you.
I think he's unmuted now. Go ahead, Jules. Maybe not. It says he's unmuted.
He might be muted in his own vehicle here. But again, that just to note, if indeed there's some connections that we can help provide to folks from Spectrum or from any of the other providers here in Pacific County, we'll be happy to oblige. So we're just about at the top of the hour now. And again, I want to invite everyone to use this email address for additional questions or follow-up. We, as a working group, pledge to keep our communications open. Again, I can't emphasize the recognition that we felt, as Guy noted, back in 2019, when he and Debbie Oakes of the PUD forged this the launch of the working group. And this, of course, is now we find ourselves in a pandemic-induced environment in which the importance of broadband is absolutely essential. And so we should celebrate the fact that we started working on this long before it became a crisis point. And but we recognize that especially with the school systems needing to provide, planning on providing virtual education even into this fall, are sorely lacking in the broadband capacity and speed that they're going to be needing here. So we indeed, we've got a lot going on, but there's a lot further to go.
Yeah, Kelly and Sue and everyone, thank you very much for being on the presentation and on the call today. Hopefully you will reach out, like Kelly mentioned, either by email, edc@pacificedc.org, or you can call any of us or email any of us individually. But thank you very much, everyone. And Kelly, if you don't have anything else, or Sue, you can go ahead and end the presentation here.